This is our house now. You're just a guest here." My daughter-in-law Victoria screamed these words at me in front of 20 guests at my grandson's birthday party. I'd spent 40 years building this $1.9 million home with my own hands, and here I was being told to sleep on the couch like some unwanted relative. The worst part? My own son Thomas just stood there, saying nothing, while everyone watched in uncomfortable silence. I'm Charles Anderson, 68 years old, and I'd been supporting this ungrateful family for 22 months. That night, as I lay awake listening to their laughter downstairs, something inside me shifted from hurt to cold calculation. But before I tell you how I legally destroyed their world in just 3 words, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe for more. 3 days later, I made a phone call that would destroy their world. Let me take you back to where this all started. 3 years ago, my wife Margaret was dying of cancer. We'd been married 42 years, and she was the anchor that kept our family together. In those final days, her hands were cold and frail, but her grip on mine was still strong when she made me promise something that would nearly destroy me. "Take care of our boy, Charlie," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hospital machines. "Family first, always." I squeezed her hand, my own shaking with grief and determination. "I promise, Maggie. I'll always be there for Thomas." She smiled then, that same smile that had captured my heart decades ago. "You're a good man, Charles Anderson. Our son is lucky to have you." Those were among the last coherent words she spoke. Margaret passed away peacefully 2 days later, leaving me alone in our big house with nothing but memories and a promise I was determined to keep. I had no idea this promise would become my prison. 6 months after Margaret's funeral, Thomas called me with desperation in his voice. My 42-year-old son had always been a dreamer, jumping from one business venture to another. This time, his 3rd startup had crashed spectacularly, leaving him and his family financially destroyed. "Dad, I don't know where else to turn," he said, his voice breaking. "We lost everything, the house, the cars, even Victoria's law practice. We need help." Victoria Anderson, my daughter-in-law, was 38 and had been a successful attorney before a malpractice suit destroyed her career. She'd always been particular about things, demanding. But she was my son's wife and the mother of my grandsons, 8-year-old twins Ethan and Nathan. "Of course, son, bring the family here. Stay as long as you need. It's just temporary, Dad, just until we get back on our feet." I opened my home to them without hesitation. Margaret would have wanted me to help, family first always. But temporary became permanent, and gratitude became entitlement. At first I was genuinely happy to have the house full of life again. The silence since Margaret's death had been suffocating. Ethan and Nathan brought energy and laughter back to rooms that had been too quiet for too long. I moved out of the master bedroom and into the guest room, giving them the larger space. I thought it was the right thing to do. They had the boys to consider after all. I started buying groceries for 5 instead of 1, covering utilities that had doubled, and picking up school supplies and clothes for the twins. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began losing my voice in my own home. Victoria would rearrange furniture without asking. She'd invite her friends over and introduce the house as if it belonged to her. When I suggested we establish some household rules about guests and expenses, she'd give me this look, like I was an old man who didn't understand how modern families worked. "Charles," she'd say with barely concealed irritation, "we're all adults here. We don't need rules." I thought I was being a good father and grandfather. One evening, about 3 months after they'd moved in, I was going through some paperwork in my home office when I came across the trust documents I'd established years earlier. Margaret and I had set up the Anderson Family Trust back in 2013 on our lawyer's advice, something about estate planning and tax benefits. I pulled out the thick manila folder and started reading through the legal language. Most of it was standard stuff, but there was one section that caught my attention. A clause about trustee powers and beneficiary status that I'd completely forgotten about. I was listed as the sole trustee with full discretionary powers over all trust assets. The house, worth $1.9 million according to the most recent appraisal, was owned by the trust, not by me personally. And there was something else. A provision that allowed the trustee to revoke beneficiary status for cause. I set the papers aside, not thinking much about it at the time. It was just legal paperwork after all. something our attorney Jonathan Bennett had recommended for tax purposes. What I didn't tell them was the one clause that could change everything. As the months passed, I found myself spending more and more money to keep the household running smoothly. Victoria had specific ideas about how things should be, and keeping peace seemed easier than fighting every battle. The twins needed new bedroom furniture, so I spent $3,500 setting up proper rooms for them. Victoria complained that the backyard was boring for children, so I hired contractors to install a $15,000 playground set, complete with swings, slides, and a climbing wall. When she mentioned that the kitchen appliances were outdated and embarrassing, I replaced them all, another $12,000. Each improvement was documented carefully. I'd always been methodical about finances, a habit from my engineering days. Every receipt went into a folder, every expense logged in my journal. "You're too generous, Dad," Thomas would say occasionally, but he never stopped me. Victoria was less subtle. "It's about time this place got updated," she'd comment, as if the improvements were long overdue rather than generous gifts. The strangest part was how natural it felt at first. I was making their dreams come true, creating a beautiful home for my grandsons. The house was alive again, filled with family. Every dollar I spent was documented. I was making their dreams come true, not knowing I was building my own nightmare. 6 months in, I decided to review the trust documents more carefully. I made an appointment with Jonathan Bennett, the attorney who'd handled our estate planning for over a decade. "Charles, good to see you," Jonathan said, shaking my hand in his downtown office. "How are you holding up since Margaret's passing?" "Getting by. Actually, I wanted to review the trust structure. With Thomas and his family living in the house, I want to make sure I understand everything." Jonathan pulled out our file and spread the documents across his desk. "The Anderson Family Trust owns the house outright. You're the sole trustee, which gives you complete discretionary control over all assets." "What exactly does that mean?" "It means you can modify, transfer, or even revoke the trust at any time. You can add or remove beneficiaries as you see fit. You have more power than a traditional property owner in some ways." I studied the papers more carefully. "And if I wanted to remove someone as a beneficiary?" "Completely within your rights, especially if you can document cause, financial exploitation, elder abuse, that sort of thing." I nodded, filing this information away. The paperwork held a secret even I had forgotten. Meanwhile, the dynamic in the house continued to shift in subtle but unmistakable ways. Victoria had started hosting dinner parties without asking me first. She'd send out invitations, plan menus, and present herself as the hostess of her home. When neighbors would call the house, Victoria would answer with, "Anderson residence, Victoria speaking," as if she were the lady of the house. I began to feel like a guest in my own home, uncertain about when I could use my own living room or kitchen. Thomas seemed oblivious to these changes, or perhaps he chose to ignore them. Whenever I tried to bring up concerns about boundaries or household decisions, he'd brush me off. "Dad, Victoria's just trying to make this place feel like home for the kids. Don't take it so personally." But it wasn't just about feeling at home. Victoria was systematically erasing my presence from my own life. Family photos disappeared from the mantel, replaced by newer pictures that featured only Thomas, Victoria, and the twins. My favorite reading chair was donated to charity without discussion because it didn't fit the aesthetic. The twins began referring to various rooms as Mom's office or Dad's workshop, as if I were merely a temporary occupant. They were already planning their future without me in it. The financial dependency became a trap more insidious than I'd initially understood. Beyond the basic expenses of food and utilities, there were constant additional costs. Victoria needed a car, since theirs had been repossessed, another $28,000. The twins needed tutoring to maintain their educational standards, $400 monthly. There were medical bills, insurance premiums, and endless emergencies that required immediate financial intervention. Every time I hesitated or questioned an expense, Victoria would deploy emotional manipulation with surgical precision. "I guess the boys don't deserve nice things," she'd say when I balked at a $500 request for new tablets. Or worse, "Maybe we should start looking at nursing homes for you, Charles. You seem overwhelmed managing a household." The nursing home comments were particularly cutting. Victoria knew I dreaded the thought of leaving my home, of being warehoused among strangers. She used this fear like a weapon. Thomas, for his part, had stopped even pretending to look for work. His job search consisted of occasional phone calls and half-hearted applications for positions he was clearly overqualified for or undermotivated to pursue. I kept documenting everything in my journal: dates, amounts, conversations. An old engineering habit that would prove more valuable than I knew, but I was about to learn that love without boundaries is just exploitation. The first major disrespect incident happened on a Tuesday morning in October. I'd gone to my usual spot in the living room to read the newspaper and discovered that my favorite recliner, the chair where Margaret and I had spent countless evenings together, was gone. "Victoria, where's my chair?" She looked up from her laptop with mild annoyance. "Oh, I donated that old thing. It was falling apart and didn't match anything. We need to modernize this place, Charles." My chest tightened. That was my chair. Margaret and I bought that chair 20 years ago. Well, she's gone now, isn't she? Time to move forward. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. I looked to Thomas for support, but he just kept scrolling through his phone, pretending he hadn't heard. That chair represented decades of memories: reading bedtime stories to Thomas, watching football games, holding Margaret's hand during her last Christmas. Now it was gone, just like that, without discussion or consideration. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. That was just the beginning. 3 weeks later, Victoria hosted her book club at the house. I'd been looking forward to it, actually. I enjoyed meeting new people and thought I might join their discussion. I'd even read the book they were discussing. When I entered the living room with a tray of coffee for the ladies, Victoria's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. "Charles, we don't need you hovering around here. This is ladies' time." The 5 women shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them, a kind-looking woman named Susan, smiled at me sympathetically. "Actually, I'd love some coffee, Mr. Anderson. Thank you." "I said we're fine," Victoria repeated, her tone sharper now. "Charles, please, go find something else to do." I set down the tray and retreated to my bedroom, my face burning with embarrassment. Through the closed door, I could hear muffled conversations and occasional laughter. I wondered if they were discussing my awkward dismissal. That night, I lay awake thinking about how I'd been made to feel like an intruder in my own home, in front of strangers. But if I thought that was bad, I was wrong. By December, Victoria had begun openly treating me like hired help rather than the homeowner. She'd leave me lists of errands to run, repairs to arrange, bills to pay. When I suggested we might want to discuss major household decisions together, she laughed. "Discuss? Charles, you don't understand how families work in the 21st century. We're not asking permission to live our lives." The birthday party planning was the worst example yet. Victoria invited extended family and neighborhood kids without consulting me. She booked an expensive catering service and charged it to my credit card. When I discovered the $1,200 charge, I tried to address it calmly. "Victoria, we should have discussed this expense first." "Should have discussed it? This is practically our house anyway." "Thomas is your only child, isn't he? We're your family." "It's still my house, and I'd appreciate being consulted on major expenses." Thomas finally spoke up, but only weakly. "Maybe we should ask Dad first next time." Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. "Ask him what? It's practically our house anyway." The casual assumption in her voice was breathtaking. Each incident was worse than the last. The credit card abuse escalated in January. I discovered a $3,200 charge on my account for what Victoria had labeled as household necessities. When I examined the receipts, I found luxury skincare products, expensive wine, and designer clothes for Victoria. "Victoria, we need to talk about this charge." She didn't even look up from her magazine. "What about it?" "These aren't household necessities. This is personal shopping." "Charles, I'm the one managing this household now. I know what we need better than you do. You said family first, remember? That's what Margaret wanted." The manipulation was breathtaking, using my dead wife's words to justify stealing from me. That's not what family first means, and you know it. Thomas walked in during our conversation and immediately sided with his wife. "Dad, you're being unreasonable. Victoria's doing her best to manage everything around here. The least you can do is trust her judgment." That night, I stared at the ceiling until dawn, finally understanding the pattern I'd been too blind or too hopeful to see earlier. But I wasn't the same man who made that promise to Margaret. Victoria's cruelest weapon was using my grandsons against me. Ethan and Nathan, now 8 years old, had always been close to me. We'd built model airplanes together, read adventure stories, and played catch in the backyard I'd built for them. But Victoria began poisoning that relationship with surgical precision. "Boys, Grandpa seems very angry at us lately," she'd say when I was within earshot. "I don't know why he's upset, but maybe we should give him some space." When the twins would approach me hesitantly, confused and hurt, Victoria would intervene. "Don't bother Grandpa right now. He's having one of his bad days." Gradually, my grandsons began avoiding me. They'd scurry past my chair, avoiding eye contact. When I tried to engage them in conversation, they'd glance nervously at their mother before responding with one-word answers. Family dinners became exercises in silent hostility. Victoria would discuss plans and decisions as if I weren't there. Thomas would nod along passively. The boys ate quickly and asked to be excused. I realized I'd lost my connection with my grandsons entirely, but the worst was yet to come. In early February, I decided to make one last attempt at a serious conversation with Thomas. I waited until Victoria was out shopping and the boys were at school. "Son, we need to talk. This situation with Victoria has gone too far." Thomas looked uncomfortable but agreed to sit down. I outlined my concerns carefully, avoiding accusatory language and focusing on specific behaviors. "She's crossing lines, Thomas. The financial decisions, the way she speaks to me in front of guests, turning the boys against me. This has to stop." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he gave me the response I'd been dreading. "Dad, I know Victoria can be intense sometimes, but she's just stressed. We've been through a lot financially. She's doing her best to make this place feel like home for our family. What about making it feel like home for me? You'll always have a place here, Dad. But maybe you need to understand that we're not just guests anymore. We're family, and we need to feel like we belong here too." There was no timeline for them leaving, no real plan, no acknowledgement of my legitimate concerns. But the worst was yet to come. The twins' 8th birthday party was Victoria's masterpiece of social theater. She'd spent weeks planning what she called the event of the season, sending out elegant invitations to 20-plus families from the neighborhood and the boys' school. I was genuinely excited about celebrating my grandson's birthday. Despite the growing tension with Victoria, Ethan and Nathan were still my boys, and I wanted their day to be special. I'd ordered custom gifts for each of them, remote-controlled airplanes I'd had engraved with their names. Victoria had transformed the house into what looked like a professional party venue. There were balloon arches, a chocolate fountain, and a full catering spread that I later learned cost $1,200. She'd hired a clown and rented party games. The backyard playground I'd installed was decorated with streamers and signs. As guests began arriving, Victoria positioned herself at the front door like a professional hostess, greeting everyone warmly and giving tours of her beautiful home. She wore a new dress that had probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. I helped where I could, carrying chairs, refilling drinks, taking photos of the boys with their friends. It felt good to be useful, to contribute to their happiness. 20 adults mingled in my living room and backyard, complimenting Victoria on her hosting skills and her beautiful home. Several neighbors told me how lucky I was to have such a wonderful daughter-in-law. I had no idea this would be my last day as a welcome guest in my own home. The trouble started when I suggested we move the gift opening inside. The February weather was turning cold, and some of the younger children were getting uncomfortable. "Victoria, should we set up the gifts in the living room? The kids look cold." She turned to me with barely concealed irritation. "Charles, I've got this handled. Just stay out of the way, okay?" I noticed she'd charged another $800 to my credit card for party supplies without mentioning it. The bill had arrived in the morning mail, and I'd been trying to find the right moment to discuss it privately. "We need to talk about the charges you made to my account." Her face flushed. "Not now, Charles. Can't you see I'm hosting a party?" "I understand, but $800 for decorations seems excessive, and I wasn't consulted." "Consulted?" Her voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby guests. "This is for your grandson's birthday. I thought you'd want them to have nice things." "Of course I do, but we agreed to discuss major expenses." "We didn't agree to anything. You're not my father, Charles. This is my house, my party, and my decision." The possessive pronouns hung in the air like poison. Several guests had stopped their conversations to listen. I felt my chest tighten with a familiar mixture of embarrassment and anger. "It's my house, Victoria, and my credit card you charged without permission." That's when she said the words that changed everything. Victoria's face went white, then red, then white again. When she spoke, her voice carried across the entire party. "Your house? This is our house now, Charles. You're just a guest here." The backyard fell silent except for the sound of children playing, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding. 20 pairs of adult eyes focused on us with the horrible fascination of witnesses to a car accident. "You're an old man who can't accept reality," Victoria continued, her voice getting louder with each word. "You've been nothing but a burden since we moved in. Always complaining, always interfering, always acting like you're in charge." I stood frozen, my hands beginning to shake. This was my home. These were my neighbors. My grandsons were somewhere in this crowd of people watching their grandmother humiliate me. "Maybe it's time you found your own place," Victoria shouted. "Or better yet, go sleep on the couch like the useless old man you are. This is our family now, and you're just dead weight." The silence that followed was deafening. Someone's wine glass clinked against a table. A child's laugh echoed from the playground, jarringly innocent against the adult cruelty. I looked around at the faces staring at me. Some showed sympathy, others embarrassment. A few seemed to enjoy the spectacle. My next-door neighbor Jim wouldn't meet my eyes. The Hendersons from down the street whispered to each other behind their hands. Thomas stood near the patio door, his face pale, his mouth slightly open. When our eyes met, I waited for him to speak up, to defend me, to show some basic loyalty to his father. He said nothing. My face burned with shame. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. The world seemed to tilt slightly, and I had to grip the patio railing to steady myself. Everyone saw, but no one said a word. The party continued around me like I'd become invisible. Guests awkwardly resumed their conversations, but the energy had shifted. People spoke in lower voices, shot glances in my direction, and began making early excuses to leave. I walked to the garage on unsteady legs, my hands still shaking from humiliation and rage. The space smelled of oil and old wood, familiar and comforting after the social nightmare I just endured. 10 minutes later, Thomas found me sitting on an overturned bucket, staring at the wall. "Dad, are you okay? Am I okay?" The question seemed absurd. Your wife just humiliated me in front of 20 people, in my own home, and you stood there and said nothing. She didn't mean it. She's just stressed about the party, about money, about everything. You know how she gets. How she gets. Thomas, she called me useless dead weight and told me to sleep on the couch, in front of our neighbors. I know. I'll talk to her. She'll apologize. But we both knew she wouldn't, and we both knew he wouldn't make her. Something inside me died that afternoon, sitting in my garage while my son made excuses for his wife's cruelty. That night, something inside me died, and something else was born. That evening, while the family celebrated downstairs with leftover birthday cake, I sat alone in my bedroom. Through the closed door, I could hear laughter and conversation, the sounds of a family that had moved on from the afternoon's ugliness as if it had never happened. But I heard something else, too. Victoria's voice, slightly drunk on wine and social triumph, entertaining the last few lingering guests with stories. "He's getting old, you know," she was saying. "Sometimes I wonder if it's early dementia or something. He gets confused about money, thinks he's still in charge of everything. It's actually kind of sad." The casual cruelty of the lie took my breath away. She was rewriting the afternoon's events, making me the villain or the victim. Either way, someone whose perspective couldn't be trusted. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the trust documents I'd reviewed months earlier. The legal language that had seemed abstract and unimportant now read like a roadmap to justice. My hands had stopped shaking. My mind felt clear and focused for the first time in months. The hurt and humiliation were crystallizing into something colder and more useful. Determination. I knew exactly what I had to do. Monday morning I made the first call. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk with a yellow legal pad, methodically planning the end of 22 months of financial and emotional abuse. The trust document spread across my desk told a clear story. The Anderson family trust owned the house outright. I was the sole trustee with complete discretionary power over all assets. Thomas and Victoria were listed as beneficiaries, but that status could be revoked for cause. I had cause. 22 months of documented cause. My engineering background served me well in moments like this. Problems had solutions. Systems had procedures. Even legal systems had mechanisms for protecting people like me. I pulled out my expense journal and began tallying the numbers: groceries, utilities, insurance, car payments, medical bills, credit card charges, home improvements. The total was staggering: $84,000 in 22 months, almost $4,000 a month supporting people who called me useless deadweight. But this wasn't about money. This was about respect, about boundaries, about teaching adult children that kindness has limits and exploitation has consequences. At 3 a.m., I drafted a simple timeline. Legal research, Monday. Attorney consultation, Tuesday. Document preparation, Wednesday through Friday. Execution, the following Monday. I knew exactly what I had to do. Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, I called Jonathan Bennett's office. Charles Anderson calling for Mr. Bennett. I need to discuss exercising my trustee powers. Jonathan's secretary put me through immediately. Charles, good to hear from you. What can I do for you? I need to revoke beneficiary status for my son and daughter-in-law. I want them removed from the trust. There was a pause. That's a significant decision, Charles. May I ask what's prompted this? Elder financial abuse, documented over 22 months. They've exploited my generosity and shown complete disrespect for my property and person. My voice was calm, professional. No emotion, just facts. Do you have documentation? Extensive. Financial records, witness statements from neighbors, recorded incidents of abuse and manipulation. Charles, I have to ask, are you certain about this? Family disputes can often be resolved through... Jonathan, they called me useless deadweight in front of 20 witnesses at my own grandson's birthday party. Then she lied to guests about my mental competency. I've made my decision. Another pause. All right. You have every legal right to do this. How quickly do you want to proceed? As quickly as possible. I can have the paperwork ready by Friday. The process takes 30 days once we file. The legal wheels were set in motion. Tuesday through Thursday, I built my case like the engineering project it had become. I researched property values and discovered the house was now worth $1.9 million. Appreciation I'd never see if I remained under Victoria's thumb. I established Anderson Properties Holdings LLC with myself as the sole member. The plan was elegant. Revoke their beneficiary status, transfer the house from the trust to the LLC, then exercise my rights as property owner. Every receipt from 22 months went into organized folders. Every expense was categorized and totaled. Every incident of disrespect was documented with dates, witnesses, and specific quotes. I calculated that I'd spent $84,000 supporting them. $84,000 to be called dead weight in my own home. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about justice, about setting boundaries that should have been established months ago, about teaching my son that enabling his wife's abuse wasn't love, it was cowardice. I opened a new bank account and had my Social Security and pension checks redirected. I researched senior living communities not because I wanted to leave my home, but because I wanted options. Thursday evening, I called my old friend George Wilson. George, I might need a place to stay for a few weeks. Family situation.
Charles, you're always welcome here. What's going on? I'll explain later. Just know that some changes are coming. They had no idea what was coming. The most satisfying part of that week was watching Victoria try to understand my sudden change in behavior. Gone was the defensive, hurt old man she'd been manipulating. In his place was someone calm, polite, and utterly unengaged with her provocations. When she complained about the grocery budget, I nodded and said, I understand your concern. When she made snide comments about my age or competency, I smiled and changed the subject. When she demanded I arrange repairs for problems she'd created, I said, I'll look into that, and then did nothing. My newfound serenity clearly disturbed her. Victoria was accustomed to getting reactions, anger, hurt, defensive explanations. My calm pleasantness left her with no handles to grab. What's wrong with you lately? She asked Thursday evening.
You're acting weird. Just trying to keep things peaceful, I replied, sipping my coffee. Thomas noticed too. Dad, you seem different. Are you feeling okay? "I'm feeling better than I have in months, son." And it was true. For the first time since they'd moved in, I felt like I had control over my own life. The powerlessness that had been eating at me for 22 months was replaced by quiet confidence. The countdown had begun. Friday afternoon, I met with Jonathan Bennett one last time to review the completed paperwork. Everything was in order. The trust beneficiary revocation was legally sound. The property transfer documents were prepared. The 30-day notice to vacate was drafted and ready for service. "Charles, once we file these documents, there's no going back. Are you absolutely certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." That evening, I quietly packed my most important possessions. Family photos, Margaret's jewelry, my father's watch, important documents. I arranged for a storage unit and scheduled a moving truck for the following Saturday. I took one last walk through the house I'd built 40 years ago. The kitchen where Margaret had taught Thomas to cook. The living room where we'd celebrated countless Christmases. The backyard where I'd taught my son to throw a baseball. But those memories belonged to a different family. The people living here now were strangers who'd forgotten the meaning of gratitude and respect. Monday morning, I made the first call. Monday morning at 9 a.m., Jonathan Bennett filed the paperwork with the county clerk's office. The Anderson Family Trust beneficiary revocation cited documented financial exploitation and elder abuse as cause for removal. The house ownership transfer from trust to LLC was processed simultaneously. Within 2 hours, I became the sole owner of my own home again, not as a trust beneficiary, but as an individual property owner with complete authority. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria, with her legal background, had overlooked the most basic principle of trust law. The trustee has absolute power over trust assets. She'd assumed that beneficiary status granted some kind of ownership rights. She was wrong. I had copies of every financial record, every receipt, every documented instance of abuse. 22 months of evidence that would stand up in any court. The best part was the timing. Victoria had grown so comfortable in her assumed authority that she'd stopped watching for threats. She was planning a weekend trip to visit her sister, discussing home renovation projects, and researching private schools for the twins, all assuming the status quo would continue indefinitely. She had no idea that her legal status in my home had just changed from family member to trespasser. They had no idea what was coming. For the next 10 days, I maintained my routine perfectly. I continued being polite and accommodating, while Victoria unknowingly sealed her own fate with continued disrespectful behavior. Tuesday, she charged another $500 to my credit card for clothing without asking. I smiled and said nothing. Wednesday, she told the twins they couldn't play with me because Grandpa is having mood problems. I nodded sympathetically when she mentioned this in front of them. Thursday, she invited her sister's family for a long weekend visit, booking them in my guest room and promising to show them our beautiful house. I helped carry their luggage. Friday, she discussed repainting the living room and complained that my furniture was dragging down the whole aesthetic. I agreed that change could be good. Every additional act of disrespect was another nail in her coffin. Every assumption of ownership, every casual dismissal of my input, every financial decision made without consultation, all of it documented, all of it building toward a legal conclusion she couldn't imagine. Thomas remained blissfully oblivious, still half-heartedly job-searching, while assuming his financial security was guaranteed by his father's generosity. The visiting family members would make perfect witnesses. Every day brought me closer to justice. Friday, February 20th, all the legal documents were finalized. I was officially the sole owner of the property. Victoria's sister's family was visiting for the weekend, giving me an audience for what was about to unfold. I arranged for a moving truck to arrive the following Monday morning. George Wilson confirmed he had space for me. I'd opened new bank accounts and redirected all my income streams. Every preparation was complete. Saturday evening, I sat in my home office preparing a brief letter that would accompany the legal documents. 2 paragraphs explaining my decision, 1 paragraph outlining their options, and a final sentence that captured everything I wanted to say. Respect is earned, not inherited. Your inheritance is your independence. Victoria spent the weekend playing hostess to her sister's family, giving tours of her house and discussing future renovation plans. She'd mentioned possibly converting my home office into a craft room for herself. Sunday night, I heard her on the phone with a contractor, getting estimates for bathroom renovations she wanted to complete before summer. I felt no anger anymore, no hurt, just a calm sense of justice about to be served. Monday morning, I would gather the family in the living room and deliver the news that would change all of our lives forever. The legal system had given me everything I needed. Victoria's own behavior had provided all the justification required. Friday afternoon, I called them into the living room. "I need to speak with everyone," I announced Monday morning after Victoria's sister's family had left. "Thomas, Victoria, please sit down. This is important." They settled onto the couch with mild curiosity. Victoria looked slightly annoyed at the interruption to her morning routine. I placed a manila envelope on the coffee table between us. "I have some news about the house." "What kind of news?" Thomas asked. "This house is no longer held in the family trust. As of last Monday, I've revoked your beneficiary status and transferred ownership to myself personally." Victoria's face went blank. "What do you mean?" "I mean you are no longer beneficiaries of the Anderson family trust. The house belongs to me individually now, and you are no longer welcome to live here." Victoria's legal training kicked in immediately. "You can't do that. There are laws protecting tenants. You're not tenants. You've never paid rent. You have no lease agreement. You're guests who have overstayed their welcome." But the trust," Victoria sputtered. "I was the sole trustee with full discretionary powers. I exercised those powers. You're no longer beneficiaries." Thomas found his voice. "Dad, what are you talking about? This is our home." "No, Thomas, this is my home. It always has been. You forgot that. Both of you forgot that." Victoria stood up, her face flushing. "I'll sue you. This is elder abuse." "With what money? On what grounds? I have 22 months of documented financial exploitation. You've charged $84,000 to my accounts without permission. You verbally abused me in front of witnesses. You have 30 days to vacate." Victoria's legal threats crumbled as quickly as they'd been made. "I'll fight this in court." "With what attorney? You lost your license, remember? And I have Jonathan Bennett, who's represented this family for 15 years. He's already reviewed every document." The reality was sinking in. Victoria's face cycled through emotions: shock, anger, denial, calculation, and finally desperate bargaining. "Charles, let's be reasonable here. We're family. We can work this out. We had 22 months to work it out. You chose to call me useless dead weight instead." Thomas was staring at the legal documents, finally understanding the scope of what had happened. "Dad, surely we can find a middle ground." The middle ground was respecting me in my own home, consulting me about expenses, treating me like family instead of hired help. "But where will we go?" Victoria's voice had shifted from demanding to pleading. "That's your problem to solve, the same way it would have been if you'd never moved in here." "What about the boys? They'll have to change schools." "You should have considered that before you decided I was dead weight." Victoria tried a different approach. "I never meant those things I said at the party. I was stressed, overwhelmed. You meant every word, and you've meant every dismissive comment, every financial decision made without consultation, every effort to erase my presence from my own life." The facade was completely gone now. No more manipulation, no more emotional blackmail, no more assumed authority. The countdown had begun. I spent the next week methodically packing my belongings while Victoria and Thomas scrambled to find housing. The contrast was instructive. I moved with calm purpose while they panicked. I took only what was mine: family photos, Margaret's jewelry, books, clothing, and personal mementos. The furniture and home improvements stayed behind, gifts for my grandson's future, whenever they might learn to appreciate them. Victoria oscillated between rage and bargaining. "This is insane, Charles. You're destroying your own family." "I'm saving what's left of it." The twins were confused and hurt. 8 years old is too young to understand adult failures, but old enough to know when their world is falling apart. "Why is Grandpa leaving?" Ethan asked his mother. "Because he's a selfish old man who doesn't care about family," Victoria snapped. I knelt down to their level. "Boys, sometimes adults need space to grow up. I love you both very much, and that will never change." "Will we see you again?" Nathan asked, his eyes bright with tears. "When you're older, if you want to." It was the hardest conversation of my life. But it was also the most honest. I wouldn't lie to them about why this was happening, but I wouldn't burden them with adult blame either. I walked away without looking back. Thomas found me loading my car Thursday evening. It was our last private conversation, and I could see he finally understood the magnitude of what had happened. "Dad, please. We can fix this. Victoria will change, I promise." "You've been making that promise for 2 years, son. But we're family. Family doesn't call each other dead weight. Family doesn't exploit generosity. Family doesn't turn children against their grandfather." Thomas was crying now, something I hadn't seen since he was a child. "I chose wrong, didn't I? I chose her over you. You chose enabling over accountability. There's a difference. I was trying to keep peace. You were avoiding conflict. That's not the same as keeping peace." Victoria appeared in the doorway, her face hard with anger. "Are you satisfied now, Charles? You've destroyed everything. I've destroyed nothing. I've simply stopped enabling your destruction of my life. You'll regret this when you're old and alone." I looked at her, really looked at her, for what I knew would be the last time. "I'm already old, Victoria. I was already alone, even when you were here. Now I'm free." Thomas made one last desperate plea. "What would Mom think about this?" "Your mother would want me to have some dignity left." But I wasn't done yet. The condo I purchased was perfect. 2 bedrooms, 1,200 square feet, a balcony overlooking a small lake. It cost $400,000, paid in cash from the sale of some investments. For the first time in 22 months, I woke up in my own space without wondering what demands or criticisms the day would bring. No one questioned my grocery choices or mocked my furniture. No one charged expenses to my credit card or dismissed my opinions. George Wilson helped me settle in, and through him I met Helen Carter, a widow from down the hall who'd lost her husband 3 years earlier. She had kind eyes and a laugh that reminded me of Margaret's. "You seem lighter," George observed after I'd been there a month. "I feel 20 years younger." I joined the community center's woodworking group and started volunteering at the local library. My blood pressure dropped to normal levels for the first time in years. The stress headaches disappeared. I slept through the night. I was rediscovering who Charles Anderson was when he wasn't being constantly criticized and financially exploited. The phone number I gave to exactly 3 people, my doctor, my lawyer, and George Wilson. Thomas had no way to reach me, which was exactly what I wanted. Meanwhile, reality was setting in for them. 2 months after leaving, I completed the final steps of my legal separation from their lives. I changed my will, removing Thomas and Victoria entirely and establishing an education fund for the twins, accessible only when they turned 18 and demonstrated good character. I removed them from all insurance policies and financial accounts. I updated my emergency contacts and medical directives. As far as the legal system was concerned, I had no son. The restraining order was a precaution Jonathan Bennett recommended after Victoria had tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. Her petition was dismissed immediately. My financial records and legal counsel demonstrated clear competency, but it showed how far she was willing to go. Extended family members tried to intervene. Thomas's cousins called, asking me to reconsider. Margaret's sister sent a letter urging reconciliation. I listened politely and explained my position once. When they continued pushing, I stopped taking their calls. "Aren't you being a little harsh?" Helen asked one evening as we watched the sunset from my balcony. "For 22 months I was generous and forgiving. Where did that get me? But they're your family. Family is supposed to be a source of love and support. They were a source of exploitation and contempt." I was Charles the Free now, not Charles the Provider. They finally understood what they had lost. The housing market in our neighborhood was brutal for people without substantial income or perfect credit. Victoria and Thomas learned this lesson quickly. Houses comparable to mine rented for $4,500 monthly, far beyond their means. The few places they could afford were in neighborhoods that would require the twins to change schools mid-year. Without me as a co-signer or financial guarantor, their options shrank dramatically. Thomas's sporadic employment history and Victoria's lack of professional income made landlords nervous. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd been forced to move in with Victoria's mother in a cramped apartment 40 miles away. The twins were struggling with the adjustment, acting out in school and asking why they couldn't go home. Victoria had tried to get legal aid for a lawsuit challenging my actions, but 3 different attorneys told her the same thing. She had no case. The trust revocation was completely legal, and their lack of tenant status meant they had no housing rights. The lifestyle I'd subsidized, private schools, organic groceries, regular dining out, new clothes and toys, evaporated overnight. Victoria, who'd grown accustomed to unlimited access to my credit cards, now had to budget for basic necessities. Thomas finally found steady work in construction, motivated by necessity rather than ambition. Reality hit them like a freight train. The neighborhood gossip network had efficiently spread the story of the birthday party incident and its aftermath. The 20 witnesses to Victoria's public humiliation hadn't remained silent. Victoria's book club quietly removed her from their mailing list. School pickup became an exercise in social isolation as other parents avoided conversation. The tennis group she'd joined stopped including her in activities. I heard she called him dead weight in front of everyone. I was told a neighbor had whispered at the grocery store. Can you imagine? That man built that beautiful house with his own hands. The way she treated him was shameful. I'm glad he stood up for himself. The social fallout extended to Thomas as well. Men who'd known him since childhood were disappointed in his failure to defend his father. His reputation in the community was permanently damaged. Several neighbors had reached out to me with support and admiration for my actions. Jim from next door called to say, "Good for you, Charles. You deserve better than that." The twins faced awkward questions at their new school. Why had they moved? Where was their grandfather? The social disruption Victoria had dismissed as unimportant was devastating for 8-year-olds. They were learning the cost of burning bridges. 4 months after I'd left, Thomas tracked down my address and sent a handwritten letter. 4 pages of genuine remorse and accountability that was years too late. Dad, I failed as a son. I enabled Victoria's behavior because I was afraid of conflict, and I let my fear destroy our relationship. I know I can't undo the damage, but I want you to know that I understand now. You deserved so much better from both of us. Victoria's letter arrived 2 weeks later, obviously coached by a counselor or attorney. Charles, I sincerely apologize for my hurtful words and actions. I was under tremendous stress and took my frustrations out on you inappropriately. I hope we can find a way to rebuild our family relationships. The letters were well written and appeared sincere, but they couldn't erase 22 months of documented abuse. They couldn't undo the public humiliation, the financial exploitation, or the systematic erosion of my dignity in my own home. I read both letters carefully and filed them away without responding. Change motivated by consequences isn't the same as genuine growth. Apologies motivated by desperation aren't the same as authentic remorse. I wish them well from a distance, but I wouldn't expose myself to future manipulation. But some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Ironically, the adversity I'd imposed on them accomplished what 22 months of enabling never could. It forced them to grow up. Thomas, motivated by necessity rather than comfort, found steady employment in construction and threw himself into building a new career. He worked overtime, took weekend projects, and slowly rebuilt his professional reputation. Victoria, humbled by the experience of genuine financial hardship, started a small legal consulting practice from home. Her malpractice insurance was expensive and her client base limited, but she was working again. The family had learned to live within their means. No more organic groceries and designer clothes, no more credit card spending sprees. They budgeted carefully and made sacrifices that taught the twins the value of money. Most importantly, they'd learned to function as an independent family unit. Thomas had stepped up as the primary breadwinner and decision-maker. Victoria had learned that charm and manipulation couldn't substitute for actual contribution. The twins, though initially traumatized by the upheaval, were adapting well to their new reality. They were learning responsibility and resilience, qualities that my enabling had prevented them from developing. From a distance, I watched them become the family they should have been all along. They finally understood what they had lost. Part 10. Final Resolution. 6 months after leaving them, I sent Thomas one final communication. Not a letter of reconciliation, but a letter of education. I kept it simple. 2 sentences that captured everything I wanted them to understand. Respect is earned, not inherited. Your inheritance is your independence. Along with the letter, I included a certified check for $25,000 made out to Ethan and Nathan Anderson Education Fund. The money was placed in a trust that would mature when each boy turned 18, with one crucial condition. They could only access it if they demonstrated good character and respect for their elders. The letter continued, "This money is for your son's college education, contingent on their development into respectful, responsible young men. It's not a gift for you, and it's not an invitation to resume contact. It's an investment in their future, with the hope that they'll learn the lessons you failed to teach." I explained that the fund would be monitored by an independent trustee. If the boys grew up to be entitled and disrespectful like their mother, the money would go to charity. If they learned to value hard work and treat others with dignity, their education would be secured. Teach them that respect is a choice, not an obligation. Teach them that gratitude is strength, not weakness. Teach them that family loyalty means protecting each other's dignity, not enabling each other's worst impulses. The final paragraph outlined my terms for any future relationship. If, when the boys are adults, they seek a relationship with their grandfather, I will consider it based on the men they've become, not the children they were. Their character will determine our connection. I mailed the letter on a Tuesday and felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. This wasn't forgiveness. It was closure. This wasn't reunion. It was education. Sometimes the greatest gift is teaching someone to stand on their own. 2 years have passed since I walked away from that house. I'm 70 now, and I wake up each morning in my small condo feeling more peaceful than I did in my mansion. Helen and I have grown close. She understands loss and starting over, and she brings joy to my days without drama or demands. We travel together, volunteer together, and enjoy the simple pleasure of each other's company, without manipulation or exploitation. I received one card from the twins last Christmas, handmade and sweet, with careful childish writing. "Dear Grandpa, we miss you. Love, Ethan and Nathan." Victoria had obviously supervised the creation, but the sentiment felt genuine. I keep Margaret's wedding ring on my pinky finger now, a reminder of promises kept and dignity preserved. When people ask about my family, I tell them the truth. I chose self-respect over false peace. No regrets, not one. The house sold last month. Thomas and Victoria had finally scraped together enough for a small home in a different neighborhood, a modest place they could actually afford. I'm glad they've found stability, but I feel no obligation to be part of their lives. Some relationships end not with explosive arguments, but with quiet boundaries. Some love requires distance to remain love. I think about those 22 months often, but not with anger. I think about them as an education in the difference between kindness and enabling, between family loyalty and self-destruction. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's exploitation. Respect without enforcement isn't respect. It's wishful thinking. Family without mutual dignity isn't family. It's just people sharing DNA. I sleep well now. I eat meals without criticism. I spend my money on things that bring me joy rather than buying peace from people who despise me. Margaret would understand. She'd want me to have some dignity left. Have you ever been disrespected in your own home? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my situation. And if you enjoyed this story of quiet justice, hit that subscribe button for more tales of people who refuse to be walked on. Sometimes the greatest gift is teaching someone to stand on their own.